Hello, and welcome to this video series. In this series, I'll be teaching you how to play the game of chess as if you were an absolute beginner. So for many of you that watch my channel regularly, this content probably won't be for you, but for maybe younger people or older people that are just getting started with the game, this could be pretty wonderful, I'm thinking. The first thing I wanted to show you is how to play against the bots on chess.com. So from the home page, and this is where you land with your own screen name shown, of course, you just go over here and hit this little hand with a pawn in it, and then rather than clicking play, which you may have done several times, you just click computer instead. And when you click computer, you'll see a list of computer players to play against. And in this video, we're going to be playing against Martin. Martin is rated 250, and with his lower rating, it'll give us an opportunity to talk about the game. It's an untimed game, which is kind of nice. And as we play through the game, hopefully help you begin to learn the rules of chess. And we'll do several of these videos. I'm hoping to do one for each of these beginning players. And then hopefully by watching these videos, you would learn how to play the game of chess from the games themselves. So let's go ahead and get started. And again, if you've been watching my other content, this content may not be right for you. But if you're brand new to chess, I think this is going to be great and you're going to enjoy it a lot. So let's jump right in and get started. Oh, and one more thing. You may have noticed that cat at the beginning of this video. Well, we've got a little friend today. This is Leo. And Leo is going to be helping to kind of serve as my student. So because you're not here with me today, I'm going to be using a Leo puppet here as a way to have an interactive conversation at times during the game, where hopefully Leo's exploratory curiosity that most cats have will have you more engaged in the show and the things that are going on versus me just talking to myself. So we'll give it a try and see what you guys think. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while. And okay, I think Leo just wanted to look at the camera for some reason, but all right, we'll go ahead and get started. And thank you again for checking this content out. Hopefully you begin to play chess and love and enjoy it as I have since the age of 4. So here we go. Got Martin selected, we'll hit play, and we'll begin the game. So he begins talking to us, which is kind of interesting. All right, so when the game begins, we can go through the different moves that are possible, which are gonna be pawn moves. Each pawn can move either 2 squares or 1 square, as I'm showing right now. So that's one set of options that we have on move 1. And then the other thing we can do is we can move this piece. And for many of you, you might be like, that piece can move? And yeah, the knight is a very special piece. The knight is able to go over pawns and then land on squares. So a knight cannot move to a square where its own piece is present. So normally the knight could also go here. But the knight's not going to be able to go to this square because that square is already controlled by white's own piece. So we can move the knight out, we can move this knight out here, or this knight out here. And again, this square that the knight could also go to is not available because our own piece is on it. Okay, so we've talked about the possible first moves. Now we're going to go ahead and just select one of these moves. Typically, in the game of chess, you're going to see one of these moves played, either the queen pawn going forward 2, the king pawn going forward 2, or the knight coming out to f3. It's a very traditional way to start the game of chess. I'm going to start with, let's go with king pawn. I think those games are kind of like where I started my chess adventure, exclusively playing my king pawn forward 2 when I was a kid, and I think it'd be good for you to see as well. So move our pawn forward, and as soon as I let go of this, my opponent, the computer player, is going to make a move. So it's turn-based. So we make a move, and then they make a move. Alright, so they move pretty fast. Like we thought for a while there, discussed all the different possibilities, and oh yeah, I'm being reminded that we do have a cat here. Okay, Leo, what do you think's going on? Leo? I'm just really scared, there's so many possibilities, what are we gonna do? That's true, there are a lot of possibilities, and that's really, I think, the hardest thing about getting started with chess is, from all the possibilities that are present on the board, where do you begin with the game? Like, we could move this pawn forward again, and we could also do any of those other moves we discussed last time. So we could move one of these pawns. Like, again, we can go through and just show, we'll only do this a couple times where we show every single move that's possible. But now these pawns can all go forward like they could before. This pawn can go forward. Pawns do not move backward, they move forward. And then we've got the knight could come out here. This knight can still come out, but he gets an additional square. So these are the knight squares that are possible. Then we have a bishop that can develop, and the bishop moves diagonally, so the bishop could move to any of these squares. And then this is the first time to talk about what happens when a bishop goes to the side of a pawn. So some of you would think if I put the bishop here that this pawn could go forward and take the bishop. But pawns are interesting. They move forward, but they capture diagonally. So this pawn would capture here, this pawn would capture here and here, this pawn would capture here and here, this pawn here, and then it protects this pawn. This pawn would capture to these squares, this pawn here and here, this pawn here and here, and then this pawn here. So hopefully through that example you can kind of see where our opponent's pieces can go. So having described a lot of that, let's go ahead and follow one of the principles in chess, which is that generally you should move out your knights before your bishops. So knights before bishops. And part of what's going on here is that when a knight goes to a square, let's take this knight for example, when a knight develops, it usually protects, well, I shouldn't say usually, it always, if it's moving forward, will protect advanced squares. So like this knight would protect this square, for example. The knight's next move could possibly be there. But the knight going here means that when this bishop comes out, it'll be protected by the knight. Like if the knight was here and the bishop comes out, it'll be protecting the bishop. So there's kind of a thought process that goes with that idea of knights before bishops, where you're basically saying, rather than playing a bishop to an unprotected square, why not put another piece out there that can help the bishop work against the opponent's pieces, so it's not out there alone to be taken. And we can look at some point, and we'll probably see it in this game, where maybe a piece does get taken because it's unprotected or things like that. But anyway, next move, let's go ahead and choose another one. And we're going to move our knight before our bishop. We're going to put this knight here. We also want to move towards the center. So these are the center squares. Generally in the game of chess, you're trying to control or occupy the center square. So this pawn occupies the center square. This pawn is attempting to control a center square. There's a square right there, right? So if this knight came out, the knight would not want to go to that square because the pawn would capture it, even though the knight could go there, right? We don't want to go to squares where we can get captured, so we're focusing on central control, knights before bishops, moving it towards the center. And we also don't want to put the knight necessarily, sometimes there will be exceptions, as we'll see many times in chess, lots of exceptions, but generally don't want to put the knight in front of these pieces because right now they have all of these squares that are possible to go to. If the knight goes here and we look at our possible moves, we just completely trapped these pieces. Now, the knight can move over pawns. So the knight moves over this, for example, to go here, or perhaps it's moving this way and going here, but it's going over other pieces. These other pieces, all of these, are unable to go over the top of other pieces. So let's go ahead and move our knight out. And we made this choice based on central control and also the idea of not wanting to block our other pieces in. So that was that decision. Okay, so we have a bit of a challenge here. They're attacking our center pawn, and we have a few choices. So typically, when one of your pieces is attacked by another piece, you'll kind of go through a series of questions. Should I capture my opponent's piece, because we could capture and they would capture back? Or should we advance, like pushing past the capture? So like I said, the pawns capture diagonally. If we move here, it seems like these pawns should be able to take each other, but they can't. The pawn here cannot be captured by either of these pawns. These pawns are controlling these squares, and so that would not be where that pawn is going. So the pawns can kind of like lock up and be fixed. And in fact, this move in this game, this is only move 3 by the way, on move 3, we're already at a point where we're kind of choosing do we want to close the position? So it would become a closed position if we push the pawn forward where pawns were not exchanged. Do we want to open up the position, which like pawn takes pawn and pawn recaptures, opens up the position where suddenly this whole file would have no pawns on it. Like pawn takes, and the only pawn on the board would be this one, and these two would be gone. So this would be wide open. And at that point, the kings would be wide open to be attacked. So like a queen could go here and say check. We haven't learned about check yet, but the queen could go there and attack the king. What I'm going to focus on here is the idea of trying to keep development in the game. So I'm going to play this knight out here to support our pawn. And then the thought process is that I want to be developing my pieces. I want to develop the knights generally before the bishops. And I want to, I eventually want a castle as well, but I'm going to play the knight here to protect my pawn. So that was my decision. Okay, they capture, and then because we protected the pawn, we can capture back. And we can see their move. Okay, so now the bishop is moved out, and the bishop now on that square controls all of these. On this square, the bishop only went this way, Now the bishop has access to both sides. And we're going to put a pawn in the center. So we lost our first center pawn is now gone. We're going to put a pawn in the center because, again, we want to occupy or control the center. And this actually does both. It occupies the d4 square. This is d4. There's a d down here, and there's a 4 right there. So d matching up with 4 becomes the square d4. And so when I make that move, over here in the notation that we haven't talked about yet, you'll see d4. Uh-oh, this is the first moment in the game where our king is being attacked. If someone attacks your king and you cannot protect your king through that attack, the game ends in what is called checkmate. But right now this bishop's attacking our king and we need to stop that attack, and we have many ways to do it. This knight could move here, so like knight moves there. This knight could move here. This knight could also move here, so the knight moves would be here and here, or this knight also here. What we're trying to do is just block this diagonal. The bishop is attacking our king. We need to put something on either of these squares to help fend off the bishop. We could also play our bishop in the way, and we could play our pawn in the way, or we could play our queen in the way. Now the unfortunate thing about the queen going in the way is this is one of our most powerful pieces on the entire board. Queen is a very powerful piece. And the bishop is only worth 3 points, whereas the queen is worth roughly 9 points. So if we played the queen up, the bishop would take our queen, and if we think about point values, they'd be ahead like 6 points, right? They'd be way ahead. So let's talk through this decision-making process. As I mentioned, we have both of these knights that can block. The queen can block, the bishop can block. But now what we're getting into is something called time in chess. And I realize it's your first video in chess ever, but I don't think it's bad to throw some of these ideas at you, and then over time you can kind of grow to have more of a meaning to your chess and play. But I'm going to say we're going to put the pawn forward because the pawn is worth significantly less than the bishop. It's only worth 1 point. The bishop's worth like 3 1/4 or a little bit over 3. And the 3 1/4 is just to say that in some positions it's worth more than the knight. A long time ago we used to just say knight is 3, bishop is 3, but now we give a very small edge to the bishop and we say it's worth slightly more than a knight. So I'm going to block it with the pawn. And again, I'm doing that because if the bishop was to take, we would be ahead materially. We'd be ahead in some point value for the board. And additionally, if the bishop doesn't take and moves again, they're beginning to lose some time. So like they played bishop here, that was 1 bishop move, 2 bishop moves. If I go here, we could see a 3rd bishop move. And during those bishop moves, we played let's say like a knight here, a pawn here, and now a pawn here. So we got 3 moves that improved our position, whereas they just have a bishop moving around. So I'll put the pawn there. And yeah, the bishop retreats. So we now have a big lead in development. I'm going to play my bishop here. Bishops like to be behind pawns generally. So you'll oftentimes play a bishop behind a pawn, and then they kind of work together in a beautiful way. The pawns are all protecting dark squares, and the bishop that arrives behind the pawn is in control of the light squares. So you're able to then have your pieces coordinate quite well. And notice how this bishop, even though these pawns are on dark squares, this bishop still has a pretty decent amount of space of where it can go. So I'm gonna play the bishop out here, and then we'll allow our opponent to move. Okay, so they played knight, and the knight threatens our knight. That's like the challenging or interesting, what? Oh, apparently the cat feels like he's not being involved enough in the video. What do you think's going on here? What would you do? I don't know. There are so many things. The knight's being attacked. Our king's still in the center. King's still in the center. I don't think we talked about the king being in the center yet. What are you saying there? We should castle. Yeah, that's a good point. We should probably think about castling. So when you castle, the king moves 2 spaces, either to the right or 2 spaces to the left. And then through moving your king only, when you move your king only, the rook will actually go to this square automatically. So if I put my king here, this rook is going to move here automatically. And that transition of the king going over and the rook switching past the king is called castling. There's queenside castling, where the queen is at as the queen side. So this would be queenside castling, and the rook would go over here where the queen is. And there's kingside castling. But there's a few rules to keep in mind when you want to castle. The first rule is that you can't have a piece of your opponent's that controls these squares. So for example, if this bishop was this bishop instead, so like this bishop was here, then my opponent's bishop would control this square, and my king cannot move through a square where my opponent's piece controls that, because I would be moving into check. We've only seen one check so far, but my king would be traveling through a square that would put him in check, and you just can't do that. So earlier we saw the bishop attack our king, and we had to respond to that, and we did. But like I said, if this is our opponent's bishop, we couldn't castle, but here we can. So I'm going to pick up the king, this piece, and drop it right here. And this is also an important thing to note that we haven't talked about as well, is the king normally can only move one space. Very slow moving piece. It moves one space at a time in any direction. So these are the squares it could move to. It can't move here because its own pawn is there. It can't move here because its own queen is there. But it can go to this open square, moving 2, and have the rook go over it. So let's look at castling. There we go, we've now castled. And we'll leave it at that for now. Okay, so our opponent puts a pawn forward. When our opponent moves, there's a couple thoughts we should be having. What does that piece that was moved do? And what I mean by that is, like, what changed as a result of that piece going there? Well, one thing that changed is this knight can no longer go here, because the knight's own square is controlled by that pawn. Additionally, the pawn now controls or is attacking this square. We don't have a piece on that square, so we're not very concerned about this move. And another thing it does is it allows this rook, we haven't talked about rooks yet, the rook to move forward 1. Rooks move side to side and up and down. But remember, the rook cannot move over pawns, so this rook could move here or here. And if they castle, the rook would move to the other side, right? So, all right, so they put their pawn there. We can pretty much do whatever we want. Our piece is attacked, but our bishop is defending it. We didn't respond last time. Let's keep that trend going and just develop another piece. Let's put our bishop out here and see what our opponent does. Okay, so now this pawn went forward, and we talked earlier about how bishops like to be behind pawns. Well, in this case, this pawn going forward creates a square for this bishop to go to. And that's going to make the bishop a lot happier. Right now it can only move to that square, but once it's on that square, it'll be able to move to all of these squares. Well, not all of them, just the first piece that it comes to, because it can't jump over pieces. And when the bishop goes there and attacks our knight, there'll be 2 pieces attacking our knight, and right now we only have 1 defender. So I'm going to play my rook here, and this is before the bishop moves. Before the bishop moves, play my rook here to protect the knight, anticipating that they're going to attack our knight. So I'm playing the rook over. Okay, and then they didn't play their bishop out. They just pushed a pawn to 1 square. So right now these pawns are attacking these squares, right? And so we always want to look at the squares in front of the pawns, the diagonal in front of the pawns, and ask ourselves, do we have a piece there that can be captured? You're going awfully fast. You might want to slow down. I don't know what's going. Okay, I can slow down. There's probably a lot going on there for sure. Okay, good call. Why don't I let you guys look at the board for a minute? Where can this knight go? Let's ask that question. That sounds really nice. Let them decide something. You've made all the moves. Every move from you. Yeah, you're right. I did make all the moves. So yeah, let's let them think about that. There's a fun move right now that white can make. It relates to a few things we talked about. We talked about the idea of putting the king in check. So that's part of the idea. And we also talked about how a bishop is worth slightly more than a knight. So with a bishop being worth more than a knight, we would like situations where this knight, for example, would be traded with this bishop or even this bishop for the purpose of then having both bishops versus an opponent that only has 1 bishop. There's a saying in chess called the bishop pair. So when you have both of your bishops, you're said to have the bishop pair. And together, these 2 control a lot of squares. You can even see, like right now, all of the squares that these bishops are able to control and occupy. And unlike a knight, their range of motion is really far-reaching. So when you have both of them, one on light squares and one on dark squares, they can just really have a high impact on the game on both sides of the board, even while being on one side or the other. So like I was saying, you can go all the way to the queen side or the king side. It's a very far-reaching, very powerful piece. Okay, so I've talked a little about that, and then we could also talk about the knights for a moment. So where can these knights move? I asked you where do you want to put the knight. You could put the knight here. You could take their knight with check. You could put the knight over here. You could put the knight here. You could put the knight back here, or this knight could go here. The 2 places it can't go are here and here, even though it does protect those squares. It is a square the knight can normally go to. It's not able to go there because that's where your own piece is. So why don't you take a moment, again, think about the idea of bishops being worth more than knights. Consider where this knight could possibly move, where it might be able to capture or be captured by one of those two pieces, and perhaps even attack the king to put the king in check, where our opponent would then have to respond to our attack. So I'll give you a minute to think about that. Why don't you go ahead and pause the video and see if you can find where that knight should go. Ooh, I want to try. I think I know. I think we need to give them a minute to think about it though, Kitty. All right, so Leo's going to give you guys a minute to think about this. And then when you guys get back from your paused video, Leo's going to help you out. Okay, pause the video. I'm going to assume that you've taken some time after pausing the video to think about where you should move this knight. And I'm hoping that after thinking for a little while, you move the knight to this square. No, just kidding. So if the knight goes to this square, the pawn would capture it, so not that square. And I wouldn't want to go over here, because that square doesn't attack the king. From this square, the knight would have these squares. Oops, this one. So if the knight, let's put the knight here. Let's say the knight was there. He would control all of these. The square is on previously and here. So not attacking the king. And if the knight takes the knight, it does attack the king, but not in a way where this bishop could trade for it. The bishop just captures it. It'd be like knight takes, bishop takes, and they still have their bishop. Do you see it? Wait a minute, bishop d6! Bishop d6? Not bishop d6, because the bishop going to d6 wouldn't attack the king. We're going to play knight to d6, and again, we look at the d down here, and we take the d all the way up, and the 6 all the way over, and that's d6, so knight d6. And we look over here in the notation, what's that plus sign mean? It means the king was in check, so the king just moved over. Okay, so we accomplished a goal here. Their king cannot castle. I didn't mention that rule to you. I said the king can't castle through check, but I didn't yet tell you that once the king moves, if the king ever moves, and he doesn't castle, then he loses or forfeits his right to castle. So now the king and the rook can't trade places. I mean, they can, but the king would have to go up and the rook over. And right now our knight controls this square. So now we're going to talk for the first time about piece coordination. Piece coordination, you say? Whatever is piece coordination, right? Well, piece coordination is about the idea of two pieces that could both together control a square. We haven't really talked about point values yet, but we want to basically create a situation where one of these knights would forcefully be able to trade perhaps for these two. Okay, that's like the happy thought in our mind is like, what if this knight could just go here? Well, in reality, the knight can just go there or there. But once the knight goes to either of those squares, the king could take the knight on these two squares. The knight could take the knight on that square. The queen could take the knight on that square. So what we want to do is we want piece coordination where we put another piece to another square where that other piece additionally is able to control this square. So then we'd have two pieces, this knight and this knight, working against this square so that one of them could go in there. And then if this knight went in here protected by this knight, or this knight protected by that knight, which is probably the way I would go. And why would I move this knight here instead of this knight? Because you want our pieces generally in the center. So I leave this knight over here, it's on the edge of the board, whereas here it's more centralized. And also, we're looking at things like what they can do to attack our knight, like pawn forward would attack the knight. I realize it's a lot to think about during the course of the game, but right now our goal is the idea of how could we, it's called forking, how could we fork these two pieces with a knight, and I'd like to put the knight there. But like I said, if I do it immediately, it gets captured, so I'm going to put this knight here, with the idea of the two knights both protecting this square, and then that allowing a knight to go in and fork one of these two pieces. So I'm going to play a knight here. Okay, and now, as a result of our threat to put the piece here, we threatened that threat of the knight moving in, and in response, Black said, oh no, I'm going to capture the knight with a bishop so it doesn't move in there, right? Because now we can't do that. If we go there, the king can take again. But our bishop was protecting the knight, so we can recapture. And when we do, the king will be in check. And then he'll only have 2 squares to choose from, because the knight controls this square, and the bishop from here will control these squares. So we'll have this under control, and the king will have to go to one of these 2 squares. Do you see that? Okay, so what are you gonna do right now? I'm gonna move the bishop and take their bishop and put them in check, and they're gonna have to move their king! Yeah, that's exactly correct. Maybe a little bit too excited there, but yeah, just bishop in with check, and the king will go to one of these, and it chooses that one. Okay, so we've got a pretty wonderful position, but the question is, how can we make it better? So we're very, very close here. Very, very close to a checkmate. In fact, and it's a pretty advanced move, we could even consider something as wild as this or even this. Actually, knight takes seems beautiful. So let's look at this. If we play knight takes pawn, and you're probably like, knight takes pawn, that doesn't seem right. Can't their knight take it? Can't their rook take it? Don't we just have a bishop? So if I take this, I only have the bishop protecting it, and either of these pieces can take. That's true. But when this piece takes or this piece takes, either of those captures, notice this square is no longer controlled. Right now the pawn controls that square, but by eliminating the pawn with the knight, our bishop can then go here, check the king, and whoa, that's checkmate. Look at this, we'd have all the squares controlled, so that would be mate. So I'm gonna take here, you see that? Capture there. And then we threaten checkmate. Ready for this? We'll see what they do. Knight takes pawn. He's saying stuff over here. The computer player saying, "You are playing well. Did my kids coach you?" It's kind of funny. All right, now we're gonna try to get closer to checkmate. We're gonna play the knight here to check the king. And we look at all of the squares that we control. The bishop has that square. This bishop has these 2 squares. And then the king will be able to go here or here again. So we're gonna go here and check the king. And then based on this next move, okay, so they did make a good choice there. Doesn't allow us to checkmate. What are we gonna do then? Play my queen up. This knight isn't protected, so they have, well, I don't want to get too much into complexity, but basically this knight doesn't have any protection. And because I see the queen is kind of eyeing the knight through this knight, I kind of want to protect this piece, or bring another piece into the game. And this would actually do both. I could go there and do both, I guess. Just trying to think about all the places that their pieces can go. So this pawn being here is really limiting that bishop's space, which is nice. Let's see. I kind of want to move my queen here though, as well. Let's do that. Let's put the queen here. And you guys haven't seen a queen yet, but queens move like this. She can move to all of these squares. This is where the queen can currently go. Oops, maybe do this. So she can move diagonally. She can move vertically. She can move diagonally this way, and she can move horizontally as well. So those are the squares that she can currently go to. Notice she can't take her own rook, so she can't go to either side there. She can't take her own bishop, but she can go to all of those squares, making her very powerful. So I'm gonna go here, and the idea is that once she gets there, she's kind of through the knight attacking this square. So if their knight was to move anywhere, we would just move the queen in, protected by our knight for checkmate. Knight would guard the queen would attack the king, and the king can never move into check, so the king couldn't take our queen because our knight would kill him. So I'm gonna put the queen here, and we'll see what they do next. All right, so the bishop comes out, and I think I'm gonna put my rook. Oh, that'd be bad. If I put my rook there, they could put the pawn forward, which would be annoying. Could play the knight there. Perhaps I'm trying too hard to play like pretty moves. Maybe I should just play. I just play this rook. I'm gonna play this rook up here, I guess. Just begin to bring our last piece into the game. Okay. So what's going on here? The rook just captured. I could capture with my king, but that would bring my king toward the center and make my king vulnerable to things like knight checks. We're able to take the knight, but what I'd prefer to do is actually use this bishop to capture the rook, so my king stays safe behind these pawns and not in a place where he can be easily checked. So I'm going to capture here. And that was a pretty big mistake by our opponent. And then now we can do a lot of things. We can kill the knight would be one option. We can also check up here, which is my first thought. I'm gonna go after checkmate. So let's look at this. We're gonna go here with check, and the king's gonna have to go there because the knight has this square. So the king can't go to these squares because of our knight. So I'm gonna put the queen there, pushing the king over here. And then when the king goes there, I'm gonna play this rook over with check. So let's look at this. So queen would be here, the king would go there, and then this rook is gonna come over with check, attacking the king. And when I attack the king, the only way to block that check is gonna be to put this knight in the way. And when this knight goes in the way, I'm gonna play rook takes knight, check. And when the knight is captured, they're probably gonna take it back with the pawn. And when they take back with the pawn, I'm gonna play this queen from this square over here for checkmate. Did you see all of that?
I didn't see any of that. That's ridiculous. What are you even talking about? I've never seen so many moves in a row. That is way too much. Slow the heck down. One move at a time. Whoa.
Oh, that's fair. Okay, well that's a good point. Let's just play one move and see what happens. Let's play this check. And like I said, the king can't go here because of our knight. He's got to go over there, so he goes there. And then we're going to move this rook because rooks move up and down and side to side. Up and down and side to side, so this rook moves like this. We're going to play the rook over to attack the king. And then like I said, this knight has to block. And then we're going to play rook takes knight. And that capture, the only move is to take back with the pawn. And then do you remember what the last move was?
Ooh, I do. I remember the last move.
Don't tell them the last move. This is for them to figure out.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to spoil the surprise. Go ahead and think about it. Pause the video. Do you see the way to win the game? That king's in an awful lot of trouble.
That's very true. So the king is in a lot of trouble. What can you do with this piece to win the game? Do you see it? Pause the video and see if you can find the winning move.
This is an awkward silence. Did you guys pause the video? I don't think they paused the video. No one's pausing the video. Pause the video.
That's a good point. Yeah, please pause the video if you didn't. And again, you're thinking about the queen and how you can win the game. What can the queen do to win the game right now? All right, so hopefully you're back after pausing the video. Where are we gonna put this queen to win the game? We're gonna put it right here? Are we gonna put it here? Here? We're gonna go here. What are we gonna do to win the game? Here? I'll show all of her squares. Just tell me to stop when you like where it is. Is there anywhere else the queen can go? You see another square? Oh yeah, there is another square, this one. And that's the right square, that's the checkmate square. The bishop controls that square, the knight controls that square, and the queen can go there, protected by the knight, and then the queen has all the squares around the king controlled, and the king can't move here because the queen would kill the king. The king can't move here because the queen would kill the king, and the king can't take the queen because the knight could capture it or the bishop could capture it. Checkmate. And there we go, we won the game. Well, let's go ahead and look at the game review to see how we did in this game. Very good job. I hope you enjoyed what may have been your first game of chess. Did you like it? Wait, what are you saying?
There was another way. There's another way to do it.
Yeah, there is actually. That's a fun thing about chess. That's a great point that Leo brings up. So when we were back here and they captured, we actually had another way to win this game. That's very good. Let's go ahead and look at that real quick. I'm going to open up an analysis board in a new window, and we're going to go to that final position right here before we make that move. And look at this. Wouldn't this have been fun? The bishop could have moved out and attacked the king. And with the queen controlling all of these squares, that looks like it would be checkmate, but black has one last final hurrah, one last move that black can make that would stop it. So bishop checks the king, and the only move that black has is to put their queen in the way, put their queen between the king and the bishop to block the check, and once she goes there, we kill the queen, and that would also be checkmate. So this would also end the game. Bishop attacks king, and the queen controls these other squares. So the king has no squares left and is checkmated. Okay, very good point that the cat brought up there. Leo brought up, I should say, right? All right, let's go back and look at our analysis. So we'll do game review. And every time you play a game of chess, especially if you're just learning, let's go back to that very, very final move, Queen H7. Anytime you play a game of chess, I want you to click this game review button at the end of your games. And the game review button is going to give you an opportunity to learn from what you did well and maybe some mistakes you made. So let's go to game review and see what the computer has to tell us. All right. We played 82.5% accurately. So if this was like a classroom in school, we'd have a B, and our opponent would have like a D or an E, right? That's really close to a D, 55.9, depending on your teacher's scale. Could be an E, maybe it gets curved up to a D, right? Okay, we had 2 great moves. So you're always curious about the quality of your moves. The first thing you look for is, did you have any brilliant moves? Brilliant moves are really hard to find, and you may not have a brilliant move for a very long time. Great moves are additionally pretty challenging, but they definitely speak to things you did well and things you should look to repeat when you play the game of chess. The computer is always analyzing moves for if they're the best move, an excellent move, a good move, a book move, and then all of these top categories, so brilliant, great, best, excellent, good, and book, all of those are really good categories to be in. We want to have as few moves as possible in the inaccuracy, mistake, miss, or blunder categories. In this case, during this game, we had 1 miss, 2 inaccuracies, and that's really not so bad for the moves that were played, right? We played, if we go back over here, we played 22 moves. And in the 22 moves that we played, we only had 3 of those moves that weren't in these other categories that we hope to be in. So let's go ahead and go to our analysis and begin walking through this game. A book move was played. Just a move that's, if you looked at a book on how to play the game of chess, the book would say this is a good way to play. And we are still in the book there. We're still in book there. And F5 is a mistake. So you notice, a thing we could ask is, did I deviate from book first, or did the opponent deviate from book? And in this case, our first 2 moves, they were book. And the computer played a move that wasn't book first. And then we responded with knight here, and it says that that was our miss. So we had 1 miss in this game, and this is our miss. It wanted us to play pawn takes pawn. Notice it says E takes F5 is best. So it actually tells us what the best move was, and that's a learning opportunity. If this position ever happens again, instead of bringing the knight out, we may want to take here. But before I jump too far into that, I do want to say that we're not computers. So oftentimes, at the end of a game, you may see something that a computer, especially very early on in the game, is evaluating as a miss or a mistake, but based on your play level and what you understand, this might actually be a better move for you with where you're currently at. Because as your coach and working with you, what I want to focus on is getting the pieces that are along this back rank into the game. I want those pieces moving in front of the pawns, I want pawns moving forward, and I want your pieces to have purpose and attacking opportunities where we're able to go after the king within the game, right? So we made that move. The computer then made the very best move in the position, which was pawn takes pawn, and then we made a best move too. The best move was to take back, and we kind of had to take back because if we don't, the pawn's going to take our knight, so we better take that one. After that, the bishop came out, and that was questionable. It says d5 is best. It wanted to play the pawn forward, attacking our knight, because we talked about time earlier, right? Remember, we play our pawn up to attack their bishop later on, and we gained time on the bishop where it had to move again. It moves once right now. We play our pawn forward, and that's our first great move. So we made a great move putting a pawn to occupy the center. Remember, these are your center squares. We generally want to have 1 or more pawns in those squares controlling the center. And then after that, bishop c3 was played, and we had all of these choices. Remember, the queen, the bishop, the knights, this knight, all of those pieces could move in the way, but we decided to play c3 because we wanted this bishop to move again. And we understood that bishop takes pawn would allow us to capture it back. If it takes the pawn, we would capture back with either this pawn or this knight. And we thought we'd be ahead then, so we played the pawn there. Then they played bishop to e7, and now their bishop has moved 1, 2, 3 times, and that was 3 additional moves. So notice we have a pawn, a knight, and a knight all developed. All of those pieces are away from their initial square, whereas our opponent only has this pawn forward and this bishop out. They do have one more slight achievement in the position, and that achievement is that this file is half open. So pawns on a file make it closed or open. This is a closed file, the pawns are there. This is also a half open file. We enjoy this half open file. We control more space on that. So if a rook or a queen comes over, they can move more freely on that half open file. And black, if they castle, their rook can move more freely on that half open file. So that is also an achievement for them in the position. That's something that has to be evaluated. You can't just look at the piece development alone, but with the piece development, we are ahead. And they have a very nice a half file to work with, and we do too. But just keep that in mind that is something for them to have right now. So we played our bishop out, that was best. It liked the bishop behind the pawn and allowing our other pieces to still have lots of motion, right? If the bishop had gone here, the queen would have one less square. And you can't make every move based on this, but especially as a beginning player, just having some thought processes that are helping to guide your moves. Knights before bishops, bishops behind pawns, bishops to squares where they're protected, either protected by a queen, or protected by a knight, or protected by a pawn. We want to put the pieces on squares where they're protected, and the reason for that is when the piece gets captured, like say knight takes knight, you're then able to play bishop takes knight and recapture the piece that was attacked. Okay, so knight comes out, and we got that exact thing. Knight's threatening our knight, but it's already protected. So here we chose to make another move. We played bishop to f4. Remember that? And why is it f4? Because this is f, and this is 4, just like battleship, f4. So bishop to f4. That's the move that we're playing. Oops. I guess I castled. I think the cat talked me into castling, actually. Remember? Leo came in and said, you should castle, remember? So we castled. My bad. But I thought we played bishop f4, but I could have looked at the notation too. Like right here, it's got this O-O, and you're like, O-O, what's O-O? Well, it's kind of showing the king and the rook changing positions. If you go queen side, so if you go this way, like this, it does O-O-O. Like, so there's like an additional movement, so it has that extra -O in it to tell you castled queen side, but here it's just 2, so that's castling. And understanding this notation will help you play through a game of chess, but we can do that another day in terms of understanding it. I'm just kind of pointing out what it is today so you can kind of begin to take it in, and then in future videos maybe we can focus on that exclusively to make you really, really good at what books are going to show you, which is notation to follow through games. They played a6, and that's a dubious move. Question mark, exclamation point, dubious, meaning it's not a move with like a specific purpose. It's not a very strong move, right? So we talked about how if the pawn maybe attacked something, or maybe prepared a pawn that would attack something, maybe it'd be a more threatening move. But in this case, it doesn't help with the idea of development. So like development was putting the pieces to not their initial square. Only one piece can leave its initial square, and when the piece goes there, it gains no additional range. It's blocked in by its own pawns. Additionally, the pawn stops the knight from developing, so it's almost working against these pieces, not helping them come to life and enjoy the game. We played the bishop out, they played the pawn forward, and we played the rook here to get ready for bishop attacks knight. Remember we were trying to put extra protection on that because they had a knight attacking it, and with this move they'd have a bishop attacking it too, so we played our rook over to add additional support to the knight. And then they played the pawn move, which has got a question on it. Again, this is actually a bad move, so this is like a small blunder, right? So what? Mistake, I guess, saying mistake. We gotta remember the categories, and they actually tell you the category right here. So that's a mistake. Double question mark would be blunder. So they make a mistake here, and they've already made several mistakes. F5 was a mistake, bishop to E7 was a mistake, bishop to B4 check was a mistake, A6 was dubious, B6 was a mistake, and then now C6 was a mistake. So they've made many, many mistakes in this game, and that speaks to the level of player that we're playing against and the opportunities that we have to win. Then this was the part of the video where I asked you to think for a while and try to get a bishop, right? So the idea was the knight could come here, and the knight would be attacking the king with check, and additionally attacking this bishop. And then you might think, well, like coach, when you went there, why didn't you take the bishop? And there's a very good reason for that. If you look at the pawns, our opponent's pawns are working against this bishop. So this bishop is what's considered a bad bishop. It has limited squares. And this bishop is actually their good bishop. It has lots of squares that it can move to, assuming these knights move. And for that reason, I want this bishop to take our knight, is what I was hoping for. And then to help encourage that move, we played our knight here, trying to come in here. Now remember, if we had been allowed to come to this square, we would have forked these two pieces. This is worth 5, this is worth 9, and this is only worth 3. So that would have given us a significant lead mathematically in material. So we played knight there, and that's the best move. And it's the best move because it's threatening something, which is to put a knight on a square. So that threat is what gives the added value to the move. And now the bishop takes our knight, we take back, and we began to think about how could we checkmate. So we played the queen out, just to kind of get our pieces a bit closer. Or no, we played the knight capture, I forgot about that. We played the knight capture trying to get mate. I was actually thinking about the move I wanted to play during the game, but then of course we talked about how, and actually queen to f3, the other move I just suggested, that's actually the best move in the position. So I played this move, but queen to f3 was best. Then we checked to save our knight, and that was best. Played our queen out. And it's each time it's showing us the moves, like it's showing us like better was bishop here. And the bishop there, the reason why that's a really good move, and why it's actually stronger, like why it's the best move here, is because it threatens to checkmate. Just bishop out and bishop there, and you're like, checkmate already? Yeah, this bishop controls this square, this knight controls this square, so if the bishop moves there, supported by this knight, then that would be checkmate. Knight guards square, bishop goes to it, attacks king, bishop attacks king, knight controls pawn, or knight controls square, I mean, and bishop controls this square, that would be mate. So I guess I could do it this way, where it's like, the knight controls those, the bishop controls that, and this other bishop attacks like that. Pretty cool, huh? So I didn't play that or think about that move during the game. I played my queen out, but there was kind of a cool move there. Bishop comes up there, we played the rook up, and then this really wild move happened. And this move is really, I think, what gave us a really easy game, right? So we played bishop takes, they moved the knight there, we checked, the king went over, we checked, the knight had to block, we captured, pawn had to take, there's no other choice because our queen has the king stuck in there, and the knight and the bishop have him stuck that way, so he's got to take with the pawn to keep the king alive. The rook's attacking the king. And then we just slid our queen over for checkmate, and we also said we could play bishop up, queen moves in the way, bishop takes queen, and that would also be checkmate. So I hope, having fully gone over that game and having the analysis here, that you're now feeling more confident to try or to begin playing the game of chess. Let me know in the comments if this was helpful for you, and hopefully you'll come around for my next video where we'll be doing the same thing against the next player. So we go over here to computer, just like we just did to begin this video, and we're going to be playing Wayne next time. So join me next time when we play Wayne with the same discussion throughout the game. We'll bring little Leo along again, so Leo will be there.
I'm gonna be there too!
Yeah, you are going to be there. And he's going to be helpful and hopefully helping you play better chess.
I certainly am! Have a great day, everybody! Bye!